Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? It is Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. Oh, I did it again. 2020. I am distracted, of course, by the fact that the impeachment trial, at least the first one anyway, of Donald Trump begins today. It won't happen until after the show is over, so you don't have to worry about being distracted. Nor do you really have to worry about not knowing exactly how impeachment trials work, because this isn't going to be one. So I suppose that leaves room for you still to answer the essay exams on your AP U.S. History or AP U.S. Government History exams, just as you learned the material. Today's events and the events that ensue from today's votes about what the rules will be for the event that begins today won't affect your historical or civic understanding of what an impeachment trial is or should be. This just isn't going to be one. It's going to carry the title. I don't think that there's anything we can do about that, but I don't know. Maybe I can explain it to you over the next 2 hours. Maybe I can even do it quicker than that. I think we can actually do that pretty easily, but the reasoning underlying it might take us a little while longer. But there are other bits and pieces of news that we may want to divert to, just so that we don't depress you, I guess, at this point. But yes, today is Tuesday, and the day, set aside for the beginning of the trial. The briefs are in. The briefs are not as brief as I thought they might be originally. What did they say? 100-plus pages from both sides. I was originally confused about what it was that the president's defense team was submitting as their brief. I didn't read the labeling quite correctly, and I thought that their answer that they initially filed, which was 7 pages, might actually be their trial brief. Which I guess that tells you exactly how ridiculous this whole situation is. I really thought that could be it, even though I was immediately struck by how ridiculous it is and how embarrassing, really, it would be. Or I guess if you look at it differently, what guts, I suppose you could use those words, it would take to file a 6-page brief before the Chief Justice and, arguably the attention of the entire nation, not that they're going to get that, and to go with a 6-page trial brief was either folly, I guess, to put it lightly, and I really did think, and still do think, that the president's legal team, such as it is, could in fact be susceptible to exactly that kind of folly. But it also might be, for instance, they would describe it, as opposed to folly, as the sort of guts it takes to, let's say, in the story that I think is largely urban legend, that sometimes gets passed around among school kids looking for an easy way out of things. The old essay exam in the philosophy class, what is courage? Have you ever heard this one? What is courage? And, some kids are beating their heads against the wall, trying to explain the concept of courage and citing prior philosophical works. As the urban legend goes, the A-plus highest grade in the class went to the student who demonstrated that courage by handing in a blank paper. That's courage. And we all get the point of the parable, but I don't know if it's really true or anybody ever really did anything quite like that. But it's comforting to school kids who don't really want to work very hard. But I think they're extraordinarily clever and deserve great grades nonetheless. Anyway, I think that I did think that the same sort of folly could be a problem for the president's legal team, given how he comprised that legal team. and that they might, in fact, there's a sort of analog to that in the legal system, a demurrer, or a motion for summary judgment, I guess in the modern practice parlance, wherein you basically state, all right, well, the prosecution or the plaintiff, if it's a civil suit, has stated their case, but they have failed to state a case that either this court can adjudicate, or that constitutes a crime, or that constitutes a tort, or whatever, whichever system of law you're working in. In other words, they've failed to state a claim upon, or a claim for which the court is competent to offer a remedy. Then you simply plead that. You say, basically, your answer is, even if everything the other side says is assumed to be true as stated, there's still no legal basis on which we can lose, and so we have nothing to say. In other words, it's like handing in the paper, the blank paper of courage. We're so sure of ourselves that we don't even need to go forward. So I guess in the old practice that was a demurrer, and now the motion for summary judgment it's not quite the same document, I guess. It's a sort of it's up to you, Your Honor. But basically, given the fact that they haven't stated a claim that the court can even help with, we ask you to, instead of going forward with a trial, simply rule that as a matter of law, this case is over, and can you do that for us? And you would include some arguments about why that would be a proper thing to do, and maybe some precedent when it's been done in similar cases, as opposed to simply throwing back a blank paper and saying we're so sure of ourselves that we won't even file anything. But you get the idea. I thought that it's possible that the Dershowitz axis of the president's defense team, such as it is, might really actually go that route. They might have that kind of arrogance and attempt that. That's kind of where the space that Dershowitz lives in these days. But on the other hand, I guess thinking back on it, hindsight being 2020, the likelihood of that kind of legal team not taking the opportunity to use the soapbox and lecture about what they think and why they think it seems pretty slim, actually, given what we know about Dershowitz. So probably shouldn't have made that mistake. And lo, I did not, or rather, they did not. I did. They did not make that mistake. They filed a 100-plus page brief, I think perhaps even longer. I think it was about 111 pages or so for the House managers. The defense boosted theirs to about 160. I had in mind the scene from Back to School where Thornton, Mr. Mellon, is supervising the people he's got in the office staff to do his homework, and he's weighing the paper. Right, it's too light. It feels like a C. Bulk it up to an A, or whatever, or B. I forget exactly what he has. Doesn't he say bring it up to a B, and if you get an A, in fact, anybody who gets A's gets a free vacation to Hawaii, off season. You remember that? Anyway, that's not important, considering that we're about to maybe sort of kind of impeach the president. All right, so what's happening outside of the briefs, which are fascinating in their own right, is the fight over the rules under which this so-called trial will be held. And we've been expecting for a long time, of course, that Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch McConnell, would accommodate the president by preventing either side from calling any witnesses in the trial. This, of course, despite the fact that that Trump himself has spent the entire time insisting that he wanted to call witnesses, but of course he only wanted to call witnesses that he wanted, and really some of them might not even have been all that bad an idea for us to call or to allow to be called. I think he also thought that certain witnesses were going to be slam dunks for not only for the defense, but that it would open to question the integrity of, in particular, Joe Biden. For instance, he thought that he could have Hunter Biden or Joe Biden or both called as witnesses, and that his ace legal team's questioning of those two witnesses would so obviously reveal their wrongdoing that the nation would not stand for anything less than their imprisonment, even though that's not something that can actually arise from a presidential impeachment, particularly one in which Donald Trump is the defendant. But I guess he probably watched enough courtroom dramas to become fooled into thinking that that Hollywood endings for criminal trials can actually happen in real life, where trials wrap up in 5 minutes and somebody makes definitive proof that the bad guy is really somebody else, and the court says, "Holy crap, you're right, you're sentenced to death," and everybody applauds and the credits roll. You can't really just do that, but I'm sure in Trump world he figures it's possible. Anyway, so in the real world, kind of, the world in which the Senate exists, what I mean is the larger universe in which you and I both exist, and there is such a thing as the United States Senate, as opposed to the world in which the Senate exists. That means, the Senate's own world, the Senate's own bubble, where 51 votes can do anything. And we recognize that. Our world includes that assumption, but not everybody's. The Senate is hard at work at engineering, not really hard at work. They're just letting Mitch McConnell do it, and then they'll just vote for whatever he puts in front of them, the Republicans anyway. And as long as there's 51 of them, that's the Senate for all intents and purposes. And they're hard at work watching Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch McConnell, if you prefer that, hard at work at coming up with a set of rules that still looks to the casual observer like the United States Senate is doing the work, but in fact, there's only one possible conclusion. Like I said, and as we've all known for a long time, the likelihood of allowing witnesses was going to be near zero. It teased us for a little while, and maybe there would be 4 Republican votes for some witnesses, or maybe there would even be a witness or 2 or 3 or 4 permitted for the House managers, but if that was the case, there would also be 4 allowed for the defense, and they would be all the hot properties that Trump wanted, whatever. But none of that really was likely to come to fruition. Finding 4 votes in the end, when push came to shove, was extraordinarily unlikely. Everybody would say they would be the 4 votes, and then they would collapse on the day of and point to some new-ish looking argument and say, that changed my mind. So we've been prepared for a long time that there would be no witnesses. What I don't think many of us anticipated until last night when we saw the rules, which means it's not an anticipation of it really, because we were tipped off by seeing the proposed rules, is that the Republicans would go even further than that and say not only will this so-called trial have no witnesses, this so-called trial might not even have any evidence. Now, I'm sure there were some people out there who guessed that correctly, because there were a couple of hints out there that the Republican trial rules would preclude the House managers from offering any new evidence, just as they would be prevented from bringing any witnesses who would likely offer up their testimony as new evidence. They would also get a fight over introducing new evidence, including perhaps some or all of the evidence that has emerged from Lev Parnas and his electronic equipment over the last couple of days. And I don't think enough attention was paid to the possibility that Republicans, in the end, really would manage to exclude this. And I think it's possible that even that McConnell may have thought that this works out better. I mean, you might wonder, well, how could it be ignored? It's big news. Of course, you're already aware that it's not big news for most Americans. Most Americans, the big news is, did you see what Brad Pitt said at the SAG Awards? And Jennifer Aniston was right there, and can you believe it? Or whatever, or, you know what? I don't know what the hell's going on in the world. The real world where the rest of the people live. I missed there was a big baseball type controversy of some kind that had something to do with a player I never heard of. And I don't even know. I can't even tell you what it's about. I can't even tell you what I'm thinking of. Just that I noticed that everybody's sort of kind of talking, and it only leaks in at the margins for me because my timeline on Twitter doesn't usually talk about it, but it does leak in. I don't know. Did you see it? I don't know what it was. That's where people's heads are. And there's not that much you can do about it. But I wondered whether McConnell might even be helped by the wide discussion among political types of all the evidence that Lev Parnas was dumping out there, because it would lead the political press and their readers to conclude that, of course, that evidence had been considered in the trial, even if it wasn't, in fact, considered in the trial. Everyone's talking about it, so of course the senators know it. Even if it wasn't formally introduced, the senators are aware of it, and it would be calculated into their votes. Yes, I mean, I guess you could argue that, but since 51 plus of the votes are locked for not guilty for the president's political party, it doesn't really get factored into anything. They're aware that the dump happened. They may even have read the evidence. They may even be personally convinced that he's guilty, but they're not going to vote that way, so that's that. And I have a feeling that McConnell is sort of counting on the fact that everyone is widely aware of it will mean that people will come away with the assumption, it'll filter out to the rest of the people, that the assumption is that evidence was admitted to trial. Okay, thank you. Darwin, I figured I could rely on you. There are a couple of people, I think, who straddle that world and pay attention to both worlds, popular entertainment being one, not this, but so sports, which counts as popular entertainment, and politics. And Darwin Darko was on. The Houston Astros were caught stealing signs by banging on trash cans. That's it. That's not a bad thing, is it? I mean, you're not supposed to steal anything, I guess. But I mean, I don't know. I suppose, depending on the technology employed, everybody's trying to steal. I don't know. I don't know the details. I don't know what they were doing. You're not supposed to steal signs. I imagine it would be considered beyond the pale to be stealing signs with satellite imagery zooming in, or camera zooming in from the right angle and stealing them off of the catcher and then relaying that by radio to people in the dugout. I guess that sounds like, my guess is that's exactly what they were doing in order to make this work. But okay. Apparently that has consumed a lot of attention, and as well as, oh my God, Brad Pitt. Anyway, the point is that I think that McConnell is probably correct in assuming that most people will come away from the haze of the news by saying, well, I saw the Lev Parnas evidence, so the Senate saw the Lev Parnas evidence. And that's a different thing from did they consider the Lev Parnas evidence. But anyway, what I really meant to get to eventually was that while a lot of us probably assumed that they would do what they could to exclude new evidence, I don't know if I saw a whole lot of people saying that they thought that the Senate rules would possibly preclude the old evidence. The Republicans had invested an awful lot of time in issuing an awful lot of sound bites saying that giving us all the wrong impression that the House is analogous in the impeachment process not to the grand jury but rather to the trial court, and that the Senate has the job of reviewing only the record that the House has produced and no more and no less in coming to its verdict. That is, I think, incorrect, but I suppose everything's open to interpretation these days, and there's nothing that says definitively in the Constitution, not that anyone would pay attention to it if it did, you'd find a way around it. That's what the OLC is for, and we'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says that one side is definitively correct about that. It's just always kind of been the assumption that the parallels and analogs were so obvious that, you would have to be an idiot to miss them. Well, we have some idiots now, and they've been missed. And the press being what it is, some Republican senators who had suits or similar formal clothing for the women senators, Marsha Blackburn in particular, I'm thinking of it, and of course Susan Collins as well, saying that there shouldn't be any new evidence introduced. We're going to base our decision on what the House has produced. What evidence has been turned over to us from the House? But all it takes is a little sleight of hand at the end of the process when everybody's kind of fatigued by it, and to write it up in legislative jargon that most people can't understand, and all of a sudden you have Senate rules that say, well, we might not even allow the House managers to present the old evidence that the House developed. We said we were going to, but that was Susan Collins and Marsha Blackburn and some other people who aren't Mitch McConnell or aren't this paper that says what the rules are going to be. And they were all wrong. You could write it that way, or you could say, well, we didn't have quite a nuanced understanding of it, or more to the point probably for these guys, that's what we were saying all along. You misunderstood us. It wasn't us that misunderstood what we were eventually going to be led to do by Mitch McConnell. It was you in the partisan hack press who misunderstood that when we said we would only consider what the House gave us, we meant that we would also not consider what the House gave us. Don't you see how foolish you're being? Because, that's kind of where we're going to land at this point. Let's explain some of that, perhaps. Pocket is chock full of stuff. I don't even know if I can sort out what the hell is out there. But I guess we'll begin with this. I'll start with this tweet which Armando sent me. And you got to wonder, Armando, I don't know. I imagine it's killing him, the idea of not commenting on this on the radio today. And I'm not even sure that I'm not under any edict that I'm aware of that says I can't have him on to do that. Although it is still a sensitive thing because we're still stuck in the middle of the primaries and people, I don't know. I never really polled the audience about that. Why don't we do that at some point? Let us know either on the KITM hashtag, or if you prefer, use email. Like, I don't know if you want to be out there voting in anything publicly viewable, or maybe you don't care and you want to speak up, then by all means use the KITM hashtag, or kagrox@gmail.com. Drop a line. If you are opposed for any reason, good or bad, and I won't tell you which one I think it is, to hearing from Armando either now or in the near future or after the primaries, or what, I'm just curious what people think about it. I don't know what I think about it. On the one hand, I feel like, it's Daily Coast Radio, and we ought to, I guess, stick with the policy there. On the other hand, I don't know what their policy is. I don't even know. I guess I can ask Armando, but maybe not on the air. I can do whatever I want on my Twitter feed, I guess. But I'm curious whether I know he's no longer considered part of the front page or contributing staff there, but is he, Armando, are you banned from commenting at all on I don't think so, right? Who knows? I don't know. It's a sensitive thing, but I'd be curious to know whether any members of our audience are would be offended if Armando commented directly on the air, given what happened, either because you felt insulted because you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, and I think we can. I don't think it's stretching the truth to say Armando insulted a lot of people in the Bernie Sanders camp, but also outside of the Bernie Sanders camp. This is the nature of the comment. That's, I think, what made it such a problem. So it's entirely possible that you could be not a Bernie fan and still say, well, either that's the decision of the Daily Coast management and you ought to stick by it, or, well, what he said was particularly offensive even if you're not a Bernie Sanders fan. I don't know. I never really worked this out, and this is the consequences of doing it. Now you waste time on impeachment day talking about this. But, okay, I just have to get that out of my head and that out of the way. Armando did send me this tweet, though, the other day, asking this, yesterday, decipher this story for me. He says, McConnell is proposing Senate rules, and he is, but the lawyers, not the senators, are going to debate it. That doesn't make sense to me. It seems like a Senate debate, not a trial debate. And it does. And it doesn't make a great deal of sense. But it sounds like that's what might be happening. And here we're talking about the rules package, which is it's just barely onto a fourth page. It's really about 3 pages of double-spaced text. So it's a short rules package, and we can read it and interpret it. But we'll have to do it after our first break. But it seems like because the trial begins today, and we find ourselves in impeachment trial mode, that McConnell puts forward a resolution containing a proposed set of rules, and the debate over those rules will be had by the House managers on one side and the president's defense team on the other side. Neither side, of course, has any senators on it. So it's an odd thing that the debate over what the Senate will vote on is going to be conducted by non-senators. And then the senators will have a binding vote on what happens. And that does strike me as very odd. It doesn't happen in any other context. But I figured, in thinking about it, well, we're not in any other context. We're in the impeachment context. And the very fact of an impeachment trial itself is premised on exactly that happening. The debate over the vote on guilty or not guilty. The verdict on the impeachment trial is voted on by senators alone, but debated by anybody but senators right before the vote is taken. So I guess once you're in that mode, that's what goes. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, well, so far, by the way, sentiment in the first few minutes of quote-unquote voting, I guess, we find no objections so far to including Armando. And I don't have any official word, and I haven't asked, maybe I never will, maybe I shouldn't, ask at World Daily Kos headquarters. And I'm not even sure whether he's available or not, and I know that he doesn't want to cause any problems. I don't know whether I'm supposed to check with anybody or not, but well, I'll tell you what. Let me continue on and explain what it was I wanted to get out, and then we'll see where things go from there. And I think we can get away with at least a little bit. I mean, a guest is a guest. We have lots of guests who aren't Daily Kos contributors. Well, lots. We don't have lots of guests, but we do have guests once in a while, and a lot of them aren't affiliated with Daily Kos. Well, some of them have not been. Like 2. All right, forget it. You get the point. Anyway, where I was going before we got onto that topic was to take a look at, we'll have Armando on at least vicariously for the moment by taking a look at the tweet that he sent me. It is a weird thing, but I think it makes a certain amount of sense once you get past the fact that the impeachment trial will be argued by non-senators but voted on by senators. I suppose it's not as wild a prospect that impeachment rules will be debated by non-senators but voted on by senators. Although it is also weird, for instance, that a senator proposes it in the form of a resolution, and I don't think that they would permit the proposal of a resolution by a non-senator. So it's a little bit of a strange hybrid, but it's a hybrid proceeding. So I guess, all right, there you have it. So, okay, last night, Manu Raju, who, the liberal hack guy from CNN, who got attacked as a liberal hack by Martha McSally, who wasn't even elected to anything, had obtained what looks like the first copy of the proposed Senate rules to be circulated widely on Twitter. He tweeted last night, along with screenshots of the document, new McConnell circulates organizing resolution, and I guess that's what it is, to Senate GOP offices. But to nobody else, not even other senators who aren't Republicans. Each side can argue for up to 24 hours over, quote, 2 session days. That got a lot of attention as well. Also, any witnesses must be deposed first. The Senate will vote on witnesses after arguments / senator questions. And there is an attached article explaining all of that. All right, best thing to do, maybe, let's see. Let's open up the article and see how he summarizes things. Maybe there's been some additional updating. Senate debate over McConnell resolution expected to begin an open session Tuesday. That's today. Open session, of course, as opposed to closed session, executive session, or with the doors closed and that cameras off. That's another thing that's still up in the air. Not clearly addressed by the rules, and anything that's not clearly addressed by the rules should be understood as not being guaranteed in any way, shape, or form. And that extends not only to new evidence and old evidence, but also television coverage on C-SPAN 2 or anywhere else of the proceedings. Yes, it is possible. This set of rules contemplates essentially a closed-door, secret impeachment trial that you don't get to witness, and that would produce a limited record for public consumption. Maybe as little as a note in the journal that cases were presented and then what the results of the vote were, and that's it. So anyway, I don't know exactly what's going to come out of it. I don't know what they'll be too embarrassed to pull off, but the rules package allows for pretty much anything. And the only constraint on things is how badly do we think this would damage vulnerable Republicans in their upcoming elections such that we lose the majority. Or I guess if you've calculated that the odds are likely that you may lose the majority regardless, they simply say, well, we're just going to have to lay down suppressing fire, do what we can do in terms of cheating in the election, at least in the presidential race, and try and hold on to the office of the presidency, or at a minimum, cover our tracks in retreat under Democratic dominance in the years to come, with a Democratic president and a Democratic trifecta in the elected branches. But we have to do everything we can to suppress the record that could be used to prosecute us after the fact, whatever their calculation is. Senate debate over McConnell resolution is expected to begin in open session Tuesday. The Senate is expected to kick off the impeachment trial into President Donald Trump in an open session Tuesday, and will move quickly into debating the organizing resolution drafted by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, according to a senior administration official involved in talks over the structure of the trial. And of course, that probably strikes you right away. Not as unusual, because we've heard that news already over the past 2 weeks, but it strikes you as improper, because it is. The White House is the president is the defendant here. He shouldn't be working with the jurors to structure the rules for the trial, but we're in a weird place. It's not an Article 3 court, and that's all there is to it. 51 votes gets you whatever you want. Again, this is an organizing resolution, is the terminology they're using. Organizing resolution is a term we don't often hear outside of the first couple days of a new Congress. Both houses use organizing resolutions. We've paid more attention on occasion to the Senate organizing resolutions because there's more potential for drama there. And in the past couple of years, we've seen drama, including proposals that Republicans, when they were in the minority back in, where were we, 2008? I don't remember what year it was, when Republicans had moved from majority into minority status in the Senate and were considering I don't know if it's entirely unprecedented, but the extraordinarily rare step of filibustering the organizing resolution. Now, before we get too far, or before that excites anybody about possibilities of filibustering the organizing resolution for the impeachment trial, I will say we may be operating under different rules there. There is a set of rules in circulation that that kind of sort of purport to be standing rules of the Senate with respect to modern impeachment practice. And I have not really parsed all of those, but it wouldn't surprise me, and in fact I think it may even be the case, that organizing resolutions are at least time limited in debate in the impeachment context. Not positive of that, but I'm also, I guess, before we get too far into speculating about it, I'm not certain it plays to the advantage of Democrats politically or otherwise to contemplate, or to at least to actually filibuster the organizing resolution. I don't know what further, although it might, further delays in the impeachment trial might give us time to bring out more evidence of which the public becomes aware, whether or not it's admissible as evidence at the trial, notwithstanding. But I got the feeling from the decision on the House side to simply go ahead and dispatch the articles of impeachment after all last week, that Democrats in officialdom had come to the conclusion that further delays didn't play to their advantage, though I don't know that I would necessarily agree. So I don't think you're going to get anywhere with the idea of filibustering the organizing resolution, even if it's allowed. So with that partially out of the way, we continue with the CNN article. The official said the chamber would debate later Tuesday an amendment to McConnell's resolution drafted by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who they helpfully remind you is a Democrat from New York. That would be sort of pro forma. You would be hard pressed if you were trying to dress this trial up in the trappings of fairness to preclude the minority from an opportunity to offer an amendment. It's just, well, we'll let them offer the amendment. We just, remember, we'll vote in lockstep no matter what is contained in the amendment in opposition to that amendment, so that we control the rules of this proceeding, unless by some odd miracle they propose a rule that would be helpful for us as Republicans, in which case, in the spirit of bipartisanship, we'll simply adopt it. But, it's no skin off their nose operating in a majority rules atmosphere to graciously grant the minority the chance to offer its own rules package. Now, we continue. While this could still change, I guess any of it could change. The timing, the ability to offer an amendment, all of it could still change. If it stays in an open session, and that's an if, the impeachment managers and the president's defense team would be the ones engaged in what will likely be a contentious debate over the measures, the new rules, since senators are not allowed to speak during the trial. So I guess if you consider yourself to be in trial mode right now at the moment, or at some point later on today, Tuesday, to be in trial mode, then the debate can't be had by senators. So I suppose that would answer the question. Although, I mean, this is a pretty definitive sounding answer. I only caution that sometimes CNN gets things like this, or any news outlet could get things like this or anything completely wrong. I mean, we've seen, just in the case of CNN rush out of the Supreme Court and tell you that the Supreme Court had decided the opposite of what they had actually decided. So It's entirely possible that they got this interpretation handed to them and it's wrong, but I don't know. I have no reason to believe that it definitely is, although it does seem awfully strange, don't you think? Just like Armando said, that the House managers and the legal team for the president's defense would debate these rules and then have them voted on by the Senate. Anyway, the House impeachment managers on Monday prepared both to make their trial arguments and debate the organizing resolution, according to Democratic aides working on the impeachment inquiry. It would be an awful waste of time for them if it turned out not to be the case that they were doing that, which I guess is just good circumstantial evidence that that interpretation is in fact correct. It would be awfully embarrassing, but not beyond the pale, for Democratic aides at this critical juncture to waste their day preparing to conduct these arguments based on a faulty interpretation of the rules. House impeachment managers are not anticipating any new evidence to emerge that they would use at the Senate trial, aides say. At this stage, it would be awfully difficult. Even if Lev Parnas spilled the beans on something outlandish at this point, it would just be difficult to have gone through enough thorough preparation to be confident enough to raise it, I think, at trial. Although, they've got some skilled lawyers, so maybe. Let's see. So House impeachment is not anticipating new evidence to emerge that would be used at trial, but they can't rule out that additional developments could play a role in the case, given how much has happened over the past month. The aides said that the Government Accountability Office report, GAO, from last week that said the president violated the Impoundment Control Act could or would be a part of their case. They pushed back on the notion that it could be inadmissible as new evidence, arguing they followed the standard of the Bill Clinton trial by submitting it to the Senate last week, even though they haven't seen the text of the organizing resolution. And remember, this is the article that accompanied Manu Raju's circulation on Twitter of the organizing resolution. So I guess, again, that must mean that they gave it to Republicans, but not Democrats, which also speaks to the partisan nature of what's going on here. I mean, it's a nod to reality. That's how things are going to be run. Republicans are going to decide what the rules are. But we ought to talk about that. We ought to make a point of discussing that. I saw Empty Wheel commenting earlier today that, let me grab that up. There's a lot going on in my Twitter feed in the morning just before we began the show. But Empty Wheel pointing out that, the Republicans are making such a show of claiming that it was Democrats who are politicizing the impeachment process when, I guess you can always convince people with the not always applicable but well understood metaphor that it takes two to tango, right? Even though I hate the misuse of that. Anyway, Empty Wheel pointing out, here's a reminder, she says, to the press parroting the GOP defense of Trump. 0 of the fact witnesses in the House were partisan Democrats, right? So the Democrats didn't allow the president to make his case. It was a mockery of due process. It was the president was deprived of due process. It was a kangaroo court, a sham trial, etc. It wasn't a trial at all, of course. The analog being to the grand jury, where all the evidence is presented by the prosecution. And that's that. Anyway, among the witnesses brought by Democrats were 0 partisan Democrats. At least 3 were partisan Republicans, as a matter of fact. The rest professed no partisan affiliation. When someone claims this is about party politics, then, right, because it's Republicans doing this, Republicans telling the press, this is all about partisan politics for the Democrats. That's why they had their sham trial in the House and didn't allow any, blah, blah, blah. We didn't allow the president to make his case. When someone claims this is about party, do not repeat that unchallenged. Trump, she continues in a second tweet, Trump has demanded that a significant number of his aides not testify, and now insists that John Bolton cannot do so. That stance is utterly inconsistent with the claim that this impeachment from the Democrats is about partisanship. And I certainly see the point in that, and I think a good thing to remind the press, but I don't know whether they're going to buy into it. I had hoped maybe to clarify that a little bit by saying, there's reason that it's important for Republicans that the press repeat their claim that Democrats made this impeachment about partisan politics, is that the Republicans are about to make this impeachment all about partisan politics. They wrote the rules. They realize that 51 votes carries and that they will be able to write the rules if they stick together as a party, therefore making it about partisan politics, right? If they stick together, they can write the rules themselves and exclude Democrats from the process of the rules writing entirely. That's a major thing. And how do we know that they are keenly aware of that? Well, Manu Raju told us. When they wrote the rules, they didn't even bother to show it to Democrats in the Senate. We don't care what Democrats in the Senate think of the proposed rules for the impeachment of the President of the United States. You have no input. I am only interested in the input of the 3 Republican senators. Will 51 of them agree with me that these ought to be the rules is the only question. So there you have it. Republicans are the ones about to make this entirely about partisan politics, and they want you to think that they need for you to think that Democrats did it first at a minimum, if not that Democrats were the only ones to do it. At minimum, they require the press to come away with a both sides story, which is easy enough to do. Obviously, they're dying for a both sides story, so give them one. We only did it this way. We only made the rules about partisan politics because the Democrats forced us to by making it about partisan politics first. That's a crucial part of the Republican case here, and indeed, crucial part of Trump's defense case. Now, let's see. I guess I put a finer point on it, I hope, by following that up. If you have any doubt about that, let's say you make that argument to an erstwhile member of the press who's open to listening to you about it, right? And they say, well, I don't know. Are you sure that Republicans are the ones making this about partisan politics? Well, if you doubt that Republicans are about to make this impeachment all about partisan politics, ask yourself, what else could it possibly be about? The rules package won't allow it to be about witnesses. The rules package won't even necessarily allow it to be about evidence, old or new. So what else is there left for this impeachment, quote-unquote, trial to be about? On what basis could members of the Senate cast their votes if the rules of the trial don't allow for witnesses and don't allow for evidence? But a vote has to be cast, right? They're going to have to make a quote-unquote decision about the, I was going to say guilt or innocence, but that's not what's in the offering, all right? It's guilty or not guilty. We don't say that trials find you innocent. That's not the point of them, and it can't even be done. But certainly not in this case. But the senators are going to have to cast a vote, guilty or not guilty at some point. Although even that is up to interpretation, right? Remember Arlen Specter, not proven. Well, I understand what you're getting at, but that's not really an option. But nobody stopped him, right? So just like this, it's a small bore example of, well, nobody's going to stand up and say you can't do it. Nobody's getting hauled off to jail here. So I guess you can do whatever you want. But there you have it. The votes have to be cast. There has to be some basis upon which the decision is made, even if it's just an individual senator's whim or a coin toss. But we know what the basis actually is. It's partisan politics. It can't be evidence. It can't be witnesses. There weren't any of those two things. They were both against the rules. So, what conclusion can you come to? You wanted to make it a both sides story, but logic compels you not to do that. However, if they do it anyway and say it's a both sides story, no one gets struck by lightning, no one goes to prison, so why don't you just print it and move on, is probably what the decision is going to be from the editors. So anyway, I thought that was probably an important part of our consideration for the morning. We'll mark that for further inclusion in the roundup and continue on with the CNN piece here. The aides say, where were we? Do we do this one? Yes. Yes, right. Democrats pushed back on the notion that it could be inadmissible, the GAO report, as new evidence, arguing that they followed the Bill Clinton trial standard by submitting it to the Senate last week. As it turns out, the rules package, that's another thing, right? McConnell spent the last week or two saying, with respect to witnesses, we probably won't allow any new witnesses, but maybe if there are some, there would have to be witness reciprocity, is what Ted Cruz was arguing. But the whole week was spent saying, we're just going to operate under the Bill Clinton rules. And that was kind of obviously a sham from the beginning, as people were pointing out. Well, under the Bill Clinton rules, there was a role for witnesses in the trial. And here there won't be. So how are those the Clinton rules? And they went back and forth on some of the technicalities and the fact that the witnesses didn't testify live and that there were depositions beforehand and they were taped and the taped depositions were played, etc. But the important part was for them to say over and over again, Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton. And the press therefore had a both sides story and ran with that one. And they're going to use the Bill Clinton rules. Now that the organizing resolution is out, however, it's pretty obvious, hey, the Bill Clinton rules were printed. I've seen them. This is not them. Yeah, well, the point is the trial is going to start tomorrow. The vote is going to be held. You guys don't really have a chance to write the analysis story that shows that we were lying about wanting to use the Bill Clinton rules for reasons of quote-unquote fairness. We decided instead, for reasons of partisan politics, to use a different set of rules, but the deadline for your writing about the start of the trial is coming, and you're going to have to cover that. You're not going to have time to even do a sidebar to the story about how we lied to you about using the Bill Clinton rules. Another flood the zone success for the Republicans. So anyway, as we left off here, remember that Democrats were arguing that the GAO report should be admissible because they followed the Bill Clinton rules. But since the Senate isn't actually going to use the Bill Clinton rules, they will argue that it is inadmissible. And really, honestly, even if they used the Bill Clinton rules, with 51 votes, they could say, well, you know what, today, for this purpose, at this particular moment, for the question of whether or not that evidence, the GAO report, is going to get in, F the Bill Clinton rules. 51 votes say, not only can you not introduce it, but that if you object that the Bill Clinton rules would have allowed for the admission of this evidence, we will vote no, they wouldn't, and we'll be right, because 51 votes are right about these things. This whole show, by the way, I mean, it's going to drive Scott crazy because there's not going to be enough links to fill out exactly what the to fill out the summary of the show's proceedings. We like to have a lot of links and draw on a lot of sources, but a lot of this is just coming from memory at this point and sources in the in general circulation. But the whole show, if you have difficulty boiling down the theme that connects all the discussion, is we're in might makes right mode right now. The 51 votes goes mode, and the world in which we exist versus the world in which the Senate exists, and to the extent that they overlap, and that we can describe to each other the atmosphere and the conditions in those other worlds. 51 votes goes. And if 51 votes say black is white, then not only is black white for these purposes, but there may never have been a white to begin with. They were both black, and you just used the wrong name, and you just declare that to be the case. They can even declare it to be a different calendar day if they want to. It's not tomorrow, it's yesterday. We say so. The end. And there's no review from this. And this is, I guess, what I'm saying here really is that this show is about the limits of constitutional law. And when what happens at the very edges? What happens when Truman gets to the edge of the ocean here and he hits the wall? Right? That's the end of reality. When things are no longer reviewable. We've talked about it in the context sometimes of the Supreme Court, and occasionally in legislative context here too. The Senate has the sole power of impeachment, and 51 votes rules. And if they say that there has been an impeachment trial and it was correctly conducted, then that's all there is to it, and there's really nowhere to go with that. The courts won't touch it. The House can't do anything about it. The president wouldn't want to do anything about it even if he could. And your alternative there is live with it and replace the Senate, whether that means the members of the Senate or the body that is the Senate or what have you. Your alternative, either swallow it or have a revolution. That's it. Most people are going to say, what's on TV? So we'll continue on with this just a little bit, leading up into our second break, and try and figure out a way out of this endless loop. But I think that's all we're going to get on this one. There's expected to be 2 hours of debate on the McConnell resolution today, beginning at, I think, 1 o'clock, right? Evenly divided between the two sides because fairness. And then Schumer is expected to offer an amendment to the resolution, and there will be 2 hours of debate on the Schumer amendment, equally divided on both sides. That will be, I think, the extent to which there will be, that's the window dressing of fairness, and we're totally operating as a real live Senate with rules and fairness and everything. And then they have the vote and it all goes away. Schumer can offer more than one amendment if he chooses, and each would prompt 2 hours of floor debate, and senators can vote to go to a closed session at any time. We'll have to get into that after the break. So Schumer could drag this on forever, but will probably feel embarrassed and won't do it. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right. During our 1 minute break, I tried to organize my thoughts a little bit, but it's not working very well. And we'll see whether I think we can. I think the decision so far, I haven't actually, now that I think about it, I guess I should check email just to make sure that there isn't anything from anybody that says, no, I would be mortified if you had Armando on the air. So far, no. I mean, not fair. People haven't heard it on the podcast, etc. But the whole show is about the unfairness of the rules as they unfold in the hands of the person with the gavel. And I guess that's me. So let's say this. If this isn't extraordinary circumstances, I don't know what is. And we will not be talking about the primary. I'll tell Armando, I'm hanging up on you if you say Bernie Sanders, or even if you say Bernie anybody, Bernie Fine, Bernie Getz, Bernie, I don't know other Bernies who are in trouble I mean, we really have to dig deep for a list of Bernies who get them. Anyway, the point is we won't be discussing that. So don't be too offended. He's Armando's president too, by which I mean, no, he isn't. He's not the president. Anyway, let's see. Mike Musson had an interesting comment. As the Senate trial process unfolds, I'm not sure what this means. As the Senate trial process unfolds, we can now see the wisdom of the OLC opinion regarding indicting the president. I'm not... that could be taken in any number of ways. Sarcastically, of course. Or actually, like legitimately, straight up. Maybe it's best that we not get into indicting the president because we can see from the Senate trial process how convoluted and crazy things can get, and we're just not going to be able to come away with a conclusion that convinces a clear majority of the population and would therefore call the whole thing into question and undermine the legitimacy of government in general. Okay, true. This could all be problematic. All right, do we continue with CNN's piece? Not much more to it, so perhaps we wrap it up. We left off noting that Schumer can offer more than one amendment, but he would likely be constrained by the politics of things, worried that it would look like Democrats were somehow being obstructionist in all this. Also, the Senate is allowed to set up to allow each side to use audio and visual elements to make their case. Interesting. There are 4 televisions set up on the Senate floor for that purpose. The official noted that in 1999 there were videos played, but there is a world of new possibilities for the monitors to be used, including PowerPoint and tweets. Right? Okay, that's true. New media available. The official also signaled Trump is supportive of the proposal from Senate Republicans to hold 2 12-hour sessions apiece for opening arguments. The official argued Trump wants the trial done, quote, as quickly as possible to his case to argue, as quickly as possible to his case. I guess wants the trial to move as quickly as possible to his case. To argue against the false facts and false process is something that's very important to him. House Democrats strongly disagree. One Democratic aide criticized McConnell for not releasing the text of the rules for the trial less than a day before it was set to begin, calling it a complete miscarriage of justice. The managers are prepared to argue their case under the potential timeline Republicans are considering, saying it would not affect their arguments, but they accused Senate Republicans of trying to get the trial done as quickly as possible ahead of the president's February 4th State of the Union address, calling the potential late-night sessions a disservice and a discredit not only to the Senate but the American people. That's true. I won't go too far into it. You've likely heard what people have had to say about this 24 hours divided over 2 days, meaning 2 12-hour, on average anyway, sessions. The Republicans argue that's okay because in 1999, people didn't use anything near the amount of time they were allotted by the rules, and so this group might not either. I don't know whether that really carries or not. But if they needed all 24 hours, what it would mean, of course, is that the bulk of the presentation of the argument in favor of voting to convict Trump would possibly be being presented in the wee hours of the morning. So basically out of the view of the American public, and they may turn off the cameras, they may close the doors. We don't really know. There's a decent portion of the defense brief that argues that a lot of the subject matter could be sensitive in terms of national security. And, because it involves foreign policy and the Russians and a hot war between the Russians and Ukrainians, it's arguably the case that there are national security elements to it. Not that the president has done anything to protect national security in that case, and has been worse for our national security concerns than arguably anything in this trial could possibly be. They will still have that cover. It will still be a both sides issue, and the press will say something national security, and the bulk of America will say, well, that explains the closed session. All right, history about to be made here. We're going to answer the phones here on Armando, and let the chips fall where they may. I think this is extraordinary circumstances
well, first,
today.
I'll apologize for everything I've done wrong in my entire life.
That's a good idea.
It
may not
for those
work,
who have
but
hard
it's
feelings,
done.
I apologize, and I'll never do it again.
Well, okay. Without getting into that
I won't do that again.
Because right,
that's for sure.
Well, yeah, not that particular thing.
That particular thing I will not do again.
If we had witnesses on for the other side, they would say, you've said that before, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
Well, that particular specific thing, I will not do that specific thing again.
Okay, well, let's make the use of this time as efficiently as possible.
Right. Let's
hell?
Talk about this farce that Mitch McConnell's putting on.
All right.
Well, I have a question for you to start. I actually asked you on Twitter, and I guess you didn't see it.
I did.
I just
didn't have an answer.
You do have an answer. What's the answer?
The answer is I don't know the answer. Well, we did. I did discuss it a little bit. Are you talking about the question of why is it that how is it that the managers and the defense team will be debating the rules on behalf of the Senate? I have no real answer to that. I'm not 100% positive that would actually be the case, but CNN certainly seems convinced. And again, that we should be able to look back to the Clinton impeachment and see video of how they handled it to know whether that's what happened or not. I'm just saying
it certainly wasn't the House managers who were involved. It was a unanimous consent of the entire Senate.
Okay, so that won't really answer our question necessarily.
Right. Well, but let me give you some extra facts. Okay. Yes. Suppose these are new rules. There are existing trial rules.
Okay.
Those are the standing impeachment rules are in the books until they're superseded by these new rules.
Yeah.
Those are the rules.
Right.
So if it's a trial motion, there's actually a process in the existing rules for how you make a motion at trial.
Yeah, you would think.
All right. So here's the thing: senators don't make motions.
Right. In trial.
In the trial, they have no standing. They can't even speak.
Right. So then it would have to fall.
So how's that working? I mean, to me, I think that CNN got it wrong, and this is in fact a pretrial motion that's basically a Senate rules thing. Now, again, here's the other thing. Schumer says he's going to offer amendments, but
yes,
again, wouldn't that be whoever? If it's a motion that's being argued by the participants, the House versus the president, wouldn't they be offering the amendments?
That's I mean, you would think so, but I can't imagine that the Senate contemplates allowing non-members of the Senate to put resolutions before them. The best answer I was able to come up with was, okay, if it's the case that we are currently in, or at 1 p.m. today, will be in trial mode, although I'm not certain by what reason. McConnell's resolution says at 1 p.m. we begin trial mode, but we haven't adopted that yet. It may be that the standing rules have something to say about that. There may have been.
He made a motion, I believe, and I think it got unanimous consent when they first, with that pomp and circumstance thing they did last week.
Yeah.
That we will reconvene at 1 p.m. on Tuesday.
Yes, okay. That does seem to me, that would be the most logical way of getting to that. So, given that we've got a unanimous consent request agreed to that we begin at 1 p.m. today, if that puts us in trial mode, that I guess maybe we anticipate the Chief Justice opening the session at 1 p.m.
And doing what?
And
so
saying,
McConnell will stand and say, as majority leader, I offer this.
It may be that
resolution.
He probably can't speak. My guess is that you would have the Chief Justice open things at 1 by previous order of the Senate, and say the chair, or whatever he would call himself.
Well, he's the presiding officer. The Chief Justice will be presiding over the Senate at the time.
Yeah, I don't know what he'll call himself.
He entertained McConnell's motion the other day. Once it was convened, and he became the presiding officer.
I guess they're in trial mode then.
And there was no objections to a few things he said about some logistics about moving chairs or something.
He may say
funny to me, but they had to have a motion to move chairs around or something.
Well, they can reconfigure the floor of the Senate. I imagine that as presiding officer, he could say the chair has before it the motion of the majority leader in writing, and the clerk will report it, and you'd read it, and then. And he'll say,
are there any objections?
Right.
Yes, there's a ton of objections. Then what?
Well, for purposes, I don't know if there's any opportunity to object to the reading. They may say, again, also perhaps by previous order of the Senate, there will be 2 hours of debate equally divided on this resolution offered by the majority leader. And for purposes of the debate, we recognize the House managers and the president's defense team. Each one
that
gets
makes no sense to me. This is the Senate adopting rules. This isn't the trial.
Well,
I understand it's rules for the trial, but the Senate, if they didn't make these rules, they'd have the standing impeachment rules that would govern.
Yes, and I guess if the standing impeachment rules dictate that once you're in trial mode, the period of silence for the senators begins, that I could engineer us a way of getting the motion before the body and designating these two trial teams to discuss it. Now, I will say that they certainly could have had this debate outside of the trial context and said, next week we're going to start the trial, and it would behoove us all to have the rules laid out ahead of time. He didn't want to do that because he wanted to spring the surprise of the package that he brought forward, which is terrible, worse than anybody thought. But,
yeah, it's much worse. It's a lie, obviously. Yeah. He said he was going to do the Clinton rules, and he didn't.
Yeah.
On a number of fronts. And, of course, I'll make that point. I mean, I'm up here. This is all minutia. At some point it gets debated. To me, I think the senators should debate it. It's their rule. And that's what I don't get.
Yeah.
But be that as it may, he's got the votes, presumably. He wouldn't bring it forward if he didn't. That means Susan Collins is a liar, and Mitt Romney's a liar, and, of course, Mitch McConnell's a liar.
Yes.
Donald Trump's a liar. They're all liars, and they're going to do this thing, which I assume you spent the first hour just describing how ridiculous this is.
Yeah, well, yes, in many ways. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The logistics of this weird rules package, without even getting into yet how terrible it is, per your question, it didn't have to be this way. They wanted it to be this way for some strange reason.
They should have debated it yesterday.
Yeah, or earlier even. But they could have done it outside of the impeachment context. I mean, the standing rules were adopted outside of the impeachment context. There wasn't even any impeachment pending, no presidential impeachment, surely, when they adopted them. The regular Senate said, you know what, because impeachments should be orderly, we will, during this downtime in 1986, I think, adopt rules so that we're not caught flat-footed next time there's an important impeachment. And so, the question of whether or not the Senate can adopt rules for an impeachment trial without being in impeachment mode is answered. This time they decided to do it in impeachment mode, and my only guess as to why McConnell wanted it was because he wanted to do it. He wanted to lay down his hand as close in time with no opportunity to fight back to the beginning of the trial. Because if you look at the package,
absolutely. I understand what he was doing. I'm just saying I actually don't think it conforms with the Senate process. But I think it's a problem if you're saying it's happening within the trial. Unless you're repealing, in essence, the existing rules, which I don't think this actually does.
It doesn't repeal them, but it would supersede them to the extent that there's a conflict, I guess.
To the degree there's a conflict, and there's plenty of conflict.
Yeah. I mean,
but there are things that are not in conflict.
Right. Does it? The answer is if you have 51 votes, it does. So, we're back to the basic realism of this. What it reminds me of, though, a lot, this has come back to memory a lot, is I don't know whether that's the answer. Nobody knows if it's the answer. So far, CNN is convinced it's the answer because Democrats have told them we think that is the answer. Democrats may be telling them that because Republicans are telling them that, not necessarily because they take the word of Republicans on this, but because they're, all right, 51 votes, that's what it's going to be, even if that's not true. But what just brings to mind to me is this is another one of those, I keep saying, Fahrenheit 9/11 moments where Republicans insist, well, this is, I don't know, this is what we're going to do. And Democrats say, I'm not sure what the rules are. And nobody says anything. And then it's like, well, if we don't say anything really soon, then we're stuck with George W. Bush as president, period, even though we all know what happened in Florida. What should we say?
Right.
I don't know. Well, clunk, down goes the gavel, too late. Oh, I really feel like we made a mistake here. But I wish I had known what
I
to
could
do.
take a 30,000-foot view or actually get into the nitty-gritty of this resolution, which I think is actually structured in a very bizarre way. Not just the unfairness of it, but just the mechanics of it.
We can do that.
So let's start with the first sentence. It says, the House of Representatives shall file its record with the Secretary of the Senate. Okay.
Right.
What's my record?
We have a problem. The House thinks it's one thing, and I believe that the Senate intends to insist that it's something else.
Its record.
Yeah.
That would be my record.
Right.
Record.
You should be able to defend it. You, after all, have the sole
what
power.
My record is, don't I?
You would have ordinarily the sole power to do so, according to the Constitution. And
Just to give you two examples, the Lev Parnas documents and those emails that were uncovered by Just Security about the hold on the military aid.
Right.
Now, that wasn't evidence that was taken at the Judiciary Committee at the time, though I assume if necessary, they could reopen the record and say, okay, we accept these. If they haven't done that, I think the Intelligence Committee probably went through the motions and did that, and they're probably formally included in the record.
That's what I
of
understand.
The House.
Yes.
But
I don't know about the emails.
But that's issue number one. So when I submit the Lev Parnas materials and the Just Security materials, someone's gonna say that's not your record. Wait a second.
Right.
It is my record. I determine what my record is.
Yes.
I'm the House of Representatives.
Right. I mean,
correct?
That's what I would say. And if I were the Republican Senate, I would say that's as may be, but this is the trial, and I have 51 votes that say it's not part of the record. And to whom are you going to appeal? Because we have the sole power of trying the impeachment.
Now, here's the Senate trying to dictate to the House what its record is. It says, let me continue. It says, which will consist of those publicly available materials that have been submitted to or produced by the House Judiciary Committee. Mm-hmm. Now, both of those things, Parnas and the Just Security materials, have been submitted to the House Judiciary Committee. All right, so I actually qualify there, including transcripts of public hearings or markups and any materials printed by the House of Representatives of the House Judiciary Committee pursuant to House Resolution 660. Now, Lev Parnas was actually subpoenaed under House Resolution 660.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
So those get in. The other materials were subpoenaed but not produced by the government to the House Judiciary Committee, but they received them from a FOIA request by a third party.
Mm-hmm. Yes, true.
All right, so there's some rulings right there that you're going to have to start with, which I think is one of the more interesting dramas that you'll see. And then, of course, you can submit it. It's sort of like if you're a lawyer, you understand the part where you submit, but it's not admitted into evidence until the judge says it's submitted. And they say materials in this record may be admitted into evidence by motion made after the Senate has disposed of the question of whether it shall be in order to consider and debate under the impeachment rules. Under the impeachment rules. Right. Which impeachment rules?
The 86 ones, I think.
Okay. Any motion to subpoena witnesses or documents. There is an impeachment rule that calls for that. But you've altered it here because I don't get to do that till after a bunch of stuff happens.
Right.
All right. So, what part of the record gets admitted? Do I have to move each piece? How many motions do I have to make? Or do I just say admit everything?
I think in the end... not surprisingly, I think I'm over analyzing it. I'm saying though that the Senate can attempt, at the very least, to exclude certain parts of what the House purports is its record if it wants to. On the other hand, I will say that operating under all of this, and McConnell is no doubt instructing his conference about it, is yes, we could object to the Lev Parnas evidence and probably win for the moment, and there could be no appeal. So maybe we win forever. We could object to the unredacted emails or any part of anything, but we're going to get bogged down. We're going to create controversy. There'll be opportunity to additional opportunity to point to our procedures and say it's a sham. The fact is, we're all locked here, 51 of us, for an acquittal, right? So let them put in the stupid evidence that they say they have, and all ignore it later.
Right? And don't know new evidence.
Right.
So,
but if they want to stick to that.
I look at the next part of the rule.
Okay.
The President and the House shall have until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., tomorrow, Wednesday. Yes. This thing opens at 1, and they have till tomorrow morning, at Wednesday, January 22nd, 2020, to file any motions permitted under the rules of impeachment with the exception of motions to subpoena witnesses or documents or any other evidentiary motions.
Yes.
Okay. So what kind of motions can you make?
I don't know.
The president could make a motion to dismiss.
True. I guess so. Yes, that's right. It contemplates that. I guess you could make motions to suppress other evidence from the other side, but I don't know if they want
All right,
to.
so let's say at 9 a.m. the president presents a motion to dismiss. Now, what does the House get to do? They get to file a response in 2 hours.
Yeah, we say no.
I mean, it's absurd. What do you mean I have 2 hours to respond to a motion?
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, in normal court Article 3 court terms.
I have never seen the motion. It's handed to me at 9, and I'm supposed to have my response to you in 2 hours in writing?
I mean, I guess really I read it last night, and I was thinking, it's weird. Obviously, this would be problematic in a court. And I was thinking, is this like their attempt to have oral arguments on the motion be done in writing instead? So that there's nothing to put on TV.
Responses shall be filed.
Yeah,
to me, that implies a written response.
Yeah, and so I was wondering whether that's basically what they're saying and saying, and instead of what we would ordinarily have.
To erase any doubt, all materials filed pursuant to this paragraph shall be filed with the secretary and be printed and made available to all parties.
Right. So I mean, it's like saying we would ordinarily have oral arguments.
I got to write it, and I got to get it printed. One of those fancy printer things.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
like an appellate brief, and have it in 2 hours.
Well,
and then we're going to argue it at 1 p.m.
Yes,
on Wednesday.
I don't have.
Well, how long are we going to argue? There's no limit to how long we argue. We might be arguing it for 2 weeks in theory.
Could be. Mind you, that the senator is supposed to read these things.
How do you win the argument? How does the argument end?
I'm not sure. Is it time limited?
I can filibuster your motion and just talk about what a bad guy Trump is for the next 3 days. Hey, your resolution doesn't say there's any time limit.
Well, let's see.
I guess you can vote on it. You can vote a limit, I suppose, or can you? Because you're not supposed to speak.
You could submit a written. I think they can submit written motions.
Yeah, I know, and they can, and there's a process. But in general, as you know, as long as Rule 7 is in place. Rule 7 of these 86 rules says the motion is submitted to the presiding justice who will make the determination or submit it to the entire body of the Senate.
Which I expect.
But when does that happen?
Is that not the next paragraph? Or no, that's
get me wrong.
That's true.
Who tells me I have to stop talking? When does my argument end? Why can't I keep talking for 15 hours?
That's a good question. That's a whole. It does say there's a time limit on the presentation of the case, but only, as it says in the next paragraph, following the disposition of such motions. So I haven't I haven't disposed of those motions yet. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Not that I believe anyone would do it.
So following the disposition of such motions, or if no motions are made. By the way, we're assuming that this all happens after this rule is adopted, after 4 hours of debate.
Right. I mean, it's possible that it either doesn't get adopted or...
Right. So here we go. And what happens the rest of the day? They're just going to argue about the rules today, presumably, right?
That's what it looks like.
Right?
Yeah.
So then they have these cockamamie rules. So let's talk about those, which, again, I think actually McConnell makes a mistake here. I tweeted out. He says 2 session days, not 2, so you have 12 hours in 2 days. But, Roberts can't show up till the afternoon. So, of course, that means 3 in the morning. If you take it literally with breaks, right? It's like 1 p.m. to 3 in the morning.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right, that's my first day. And that, I assume, would be Thursday. And then the next day we show up again at 1, and we have another long day.
Yeah.
Right? So what do I get to present at this argument? What are we arguing?
I don't know. I mean, I assume you're reading
do I get to
from
present
the briefs, essentially.
The record that's not admitted into evidence yet? Do I get to play videotapes of the appearances of the witnesses? Like, can I put on 50 minutes of the questioning I like from Sondland and 30 minutes from Taylor and 15 minutes from Hill? And can I put on the press conference of Mulvaney? Do I get to run all those things? Is that what I get to do?
I don't know for sure. Well, maybe I'll have to parse that, and we'll take a quick break in just a minute or here, or 30 seconds, and then take a 2-minute break and see if we can figure out an answer to that, because I don't know if you have one in mind.
Well, I do.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I would think you could, well, so far it looks like you can do whatever you want with it. But it does pose a weird question if you're going to try and exclude all that later as evidence. All right, we'll be right back to consider this some more. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've had further discussions during the break. It's fascinating. We pick up where we left off. Your question was, what do the rules tell us, if anything, about what the House managers are allowed to present?
What do I get to do in my 24 hours?
Yeah.
What do I get to present? I'm going to give you the ones that I feel are going to be controversial.
Yeah.
I want to play Mick Mulvaney's press conference.
Yeah. I mean, you would want to. And, right, as you mentioned, so immediately, perhaps, the president's lawyers object. Although, who knows
that wasn't
why,
under oath. It's hearsay. It's,
yeah.
You know, you need to call Mulvaney to come testify about that.
Okay.
He's the best evidence. These are things trial lawyers say at trials.
Yes.
By the way.
Right. This is, of course, the videotape is, in fact, the best evidence since witnesses are precluded, but all right.
Right. Well, that'd be
the fight.
Counter argument. Say, well, that's great. Let's all agree now that Mick Mulvaney's going to be subpoenaed to testify, and I'll refrain from using it.
What?
Counselor? No. I don't agree to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then how can I not reference this?
Yeah. Right. And so, as you're pointing out, I'll have a fight over every one of these things. One of your first question, it's not clear whether the time spent fighting over it and then the time spent voting on it, if that's what it comes to, comes out of the 24 hours.
My 24 hours.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Each time they have such a fight.
All right. And the objection is addressed to, as if Rule 7 still applies, is addressed to the presiding officer, who is the Chief Justice of the United States.
Yeah.
Who we both feel is going to punt on all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
To the Senate. How does the Senate decide? It takes a roll call vote.
Yeah.
How long does that take?
As
and
long
we're
as
going to do this with every piece of evidence.
Yeah. True. Now, in the House, they have regular procedures for shortening votes, but they also regularly say, all right, this is going to be an X minute vote, and then it's not one because it goes on, because members are still waiting to vote. So
say it takes 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That
would be the fastest
they don't have
vote
electronic voting. They go up and say aye.
Oh, right. Yes, they
as
have to
I've
vote
seen
from
at
their
the Senate,
seats.
they don't have electronic voting.
That's true in an ordinary process, but in the impeachment process, voting is done roll call style, and senators vote from their seats.
Exactly.
And they don't come up and give the thumbs up.
It's going to take some time.
Yeah.
All right. A more practical way of doing it is outlining what you're permitting, so the House impeachment managers can prepare their presentation.
Right.
Now, if they're not going to, if the House impeachment managers are not going to put that on, I'm going to be upset, because that means they're stupid. And why are we here? You want to put it all on.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't want to argue. Having a talking head just talking about something is not nearly as effective as pressing the button and having Mulvaney tape play, for example.
Right.
That we do this all the time, quid pro quos. Or the part where Sondland says without any shadow of doubt it was absolutely a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Bill Taylor saying whatever he said, and Fiona Hill saying it was a drug deal, and Bolton saying it was that Bolton told her it was a drug deal. That's hearsay, by the way, David.
So they say.
I'm saying that the best evidence is John Bolton's testimony.
Right, and so he ought to be subpoenaed, and to which Republicans object. And then,
strictly speaking, before the lawyers get on me, it isn't hearsay because you're not offering it necessarily for the truth of the statement. You're offering it
that would be an exception.
The fact that he said it.
True, and that's a good
my
trick.
idea. There's always something you can say, and none of this has been worked out in these rules.
Right,
and I think just strategically, I think House managers have to push that. You're not going to see this today. This would be tomorrow, by the way, whoever's listening, because the presentations, I assume, will start tomorrow. But it's something to look for, unless they're going to debate those things today.
That would be...
Which I wouldn't if I was a Democrat. I'd make the big to-do tomorrow. Here's my bottom line. I don't think there's any chance that the Republicans are going to let any witnesses on.
No.
I think they're going to exclude as much evidence as they can. I think they will be forced to accept the record, however they want to define it. They can try to exclude Parnas and the just security stuff to give you the two examples, but whatever happened in the House Judiciary Committee was accepted, will be accepted as evidence.
Yes, that doesn't, like we said, there's no skin off their nose if they're committed to voting to acquit regardless. Of course, you could say the same about witnesses, but it just makes it that much more uncomfortable if something unexpected happens and they still have to commit to voting to acquit.
You don't want those witnesses anyway, because even though you and I watched all that testimony back in October or November, wherever that was, you want people to see it again. You want people to see Fiona Hill talking about it. You want to see people having Bill Taylor talk about it. You want to have Gordon Sondland talking about it. You want to put on the lady from the Department of Defense who said they got an inquiry from the Ukraine that day about what's the holdup with our military aid. There's lots of evidence. There really is. We talk about the missing evidence, and there is tons of missing evidence. But that's not the same thing as saying there is not a mountain of evidence already.
That's true. It's there. That's all you need.
I'll give you one classic to me is when Trump said, what did you want Ukraine to do? I want him to open an investigation of Biden.
Yeah. That would be good evidence.
He confessed, right? I mean, how could I not want to put that on?
You would.
So I think there is such a mess here, and I find the reporting on this is sort of just a side note, to have been incredibly shoddy on every level. They have no idea. Look, they did the Clinton impeachment. If you remember the Clinton impeachment, the evidence was accepted. Ken Starr wrote a 700-page report. He had 15 bankers boxes, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And I will admit, I don't recall if they played anything in their first presentation of this stuff, but I feel they could have if they wanted to put videotape a deposition of Clinton in the grand jury, which of course was part of the record.
Yeah. And
whatever else they had in that record. But remember what also happened after that whole thing happened. By the way, just so people remember, the streamlined Clinton impeachment trial, you know how long it took?
Not offhand, I don't.
5 weeks.
Wow. I don't remember it that way.
Nobody remembers. 5 weeks it took. After the first 2 weeks, after the first, they did these presentations. They spent a week doing presentations. By the way, in that impeachment hearing, trial, the House managers had the right of rebuttal.
Okay. Yes.
That's been stripped here too. Generally, the person prosecuting or the plaintiff, for example, goes first and last.
And not so here.
No,
because both
Trump
sides,
will go
fairness. Yeah, okay. Interesting.
It's really important. The last impression matters.
Well, right. It does. It's enormously important. It just also happens to be another illustration again of, well, we're going to do the Clinton rules, and everybody wrote that. And then when the national conscience, to the extent that had paid any attention at all, had registered will be Clinton rules, they just said, all right, now that everybody thinks that, it won't be the Clinton rules, and hurry up and we're going to vote on it, and it's going to be done, and there's nothing you can do about it. By the time you realize, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the Clinton rules, it'll be too late. Oh, yeah, you're right. However, what's done is done. Sorry.
Right. So,
if you even remember what the Clinton rules were.
How they work out this issue of what I can do in the 24 hours, what counts against my 24 hours, et cetera. I've got to do it in 2 days. So,
yeah, there may be standing rules about what counts too.
As you said, McConnell could adjourn for 2 hours and say, we're going to do this from 12 in the morning till 6 in the morning.
Yeah, that's possible, and I wouldn't put it past them.
Right. So then, of course, the next thing that comes is senators' questions, which are okay, whatever. Yeah. But it's 16 hours. But you'll notice that there is no limit to the session days. For the senators' questions. They could take 3 days, 4 days.
True. All right.
Who knows how long that's going to take? I mean, I suspect it'll be 2 days, 2 normal 8-hour days, right?
Yeah.
And then it says, upon the conclusion of questioning by the Senate, there shall be 4 hours of argument by the parties equally divided. So that I get 2 hours only for a closing. Mm-hmm. So what exactly am I doing with my 24 if I'm not presenting the record?
I don't know. And that may be where Republicans have been saying, this complaint that Democrats have that we're going to force these 2 marathon sessions are unfounded. After all, nobody used anything close to their allotted time as they said, in the Clinton
that's because the facts were basically stipulated.
Right. Here you don't have the chance to do that, and they may fight you at every turn if you try to establish the facts. And they may or may not count that time spent fighting against your 24 hours. But, they may end up saying, well, we forbid you from presenting any of the things you wanted to present. And then you're standing there saying, well, I'm not allowed to present anything. And say, well, then
so what am I doing here?
You want to yield back the rest of your 24 hours? Right.
Yeah, and I don't need any time. If I can't actually present my case, then what am I doing?
Right. At which point, I guess Republicans, their plan at that point is to say, we gave you 2 full days to present anything you wanted, and you didn't do it.
No, you said, excuse me, you didn't let me present anything I want.
I'm sorry, this press conference is over.
It's over.
I just said I allowed you to present anything you wanted. I understand you had a blah, blah, blah thing to answer me with, but this isn't your press conference. It's mine. Write that down, Wall Street Journal. I gave him 2 days.
All right. So at any rate, you have 2 hours of closing, in theory, of the opening stage.
Yeah, right.
And then followed by deliberation by the Senate. Deliberation on what?
Whatever they have. Yeah.
This is what I'm deliberating. What? I'm not asking you to convict him after that. I want to put on my case. I want to get more witnesses for my case. Unless you're ready to convict him. But if you're not, and I assume if you're ready to convict him, the other side's going to say, wait a second, I got to put on my case.
Yeah. Well, I imagine there people would say, well, it doesn't make any sense to say, as soon as we're done talking, you vote. They need some time to ponder stuff. Now, they're not going to ponder anything, but...
What are they pondering? What's the question that they have before them?
The paucity of the prosecution's case.
But yeah, I know you're laughing, but it doesn't make sense. There's no question before the Senate at that point. You can't tell me you're saying that's all I get to do and that may be it? And then, okay, well, we deliberated. We've ordered no witnesses, no subpoenas, and we've acquitted them. Are they really going to do that? Yes.
Yeah, or
but
very nearly.
It's a blatant cover-up.
Yeah, not good rules, to be sure. And I mean, right from the beginning, the fact that they said, well, we're going to do the Clinton rules, and then they didn't do the Clinton rules. I just saw, as we began this, when we came back from the break, Brian Beutler tweeting, this feels like a take it to the streets moment, which is another reason why McConnell introduced the terms of the cover-up a few hours before he'd ask his members to adopt them. So there would be no time. Not that we've done very well with taking anything to the street, but, you don't see me going, so I don't blame you for not going. But that's not what Americans tend to do.
I don't even think of it that way. And again, he's not going to be removed from office. The whole purpose for me, a political purpose. I mean, he should be removed from office. Don't get me wrong. This is the case for impeachment and removal. There is no better case. There's never been a better case. Nixon case is 1/10 what this is. This is an absolute abuse of power. The very definition of high crimes and misdemeanors adopted from the English common law. Now, look, I imagine you guys have already had your fun with Dershowitz, but the guy just made a buffoon of himself. I mean, it's not even funny.
It is
funny. It's very funny, but that's not even an argument I think Trump would have wanted. The argument that he's forced in here. He does, because whether they accept that abuse of power is an impeachable offense or not, the last thing you want to be arguing is making the senators agree with that. They're not going to agree with that. They're going to say, no, it is an impeachable offense, but what he did doesn't rise to that level.
That's certainly a place where they could land if they wanted to preserve the notion that they would be jealously guarding their prerogatives like the founders.
You just don't want to be the person saying, yeah, you're right, abuse of power is not an impeachable offense. You've seen the example that he gave in his book, which I had never read, but I saw the example, and it's so, obviously the Democrats would be arguing what his example is. Trump could give Alaska to Putin.
Yes.
And that's not an impeachable offense. That was his choice of example.
Yes. I did see that, and a lot of people said, boy, he should make that presentation in front of the Senate.
Yes. As I said, he won't, but the Democrats should make it for him and cite his book.
Yeah. I mean, people should know that that's what he means.
They should know that he's a wacko buffoon.
Yes. I don't see why not. And they should, but it won't be as easily done with all the rest of them. But, I mean, it's not surprising. I did see a lot of good commentary over the weekend that, the president's legal team is, with the exception of, I guess, the people coming from the White House counsel's office, just people that he has seen playing lawyers on TV. Fox News lawyers.
Impeachment managers. What are they going to do?
Yeah. I don't know. But, but they could certainly point that out. And, I mean, that's if you haven't seen that one, then you don't know where. I guess you won't understand where Dershowitz is coming from. But it's a pretty incredible thing. But I guess it harkens back to what we've talked about for a while, was that at a certain level, if the president decides that it's a foreign policy priority for him to promote literal political union with Russia, he can do that. And I suppose if people will allow him to do that, then he'll be allowed to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the example is so off the wall at any rate, but
it's hard to think about. That's how crazy it is.
If we're going to entertain it,
hard to understand.
People own land in Alaska.
Yes, they do.
There's a Fifth Amendment prohibition against taking without just compensation.
Right.
The president doesn't get to take without just compensation.
Right. And, normally, where we've been on this
so even, as I said, I treated it seriously. I said, but there's a constitutional objection to your argument on how the president can give away Alaska. That's private property, and that would be the government doing a taking without just compensation, and that's clearly against the Constitution. Mm-hmm. So I guess, who's going to pay? I mean, he can't force Congress to pay the people, so he can't do it by himself. Anyway, enough of the silliness. Let's talk about what's more. I think it's almost as far-fetched, but suppose they do allow subpoena witnesses and documents.
Okay.
It says here, if the Senate agrees to allow witnesses, the witnesses shall first be deposed, and the Senate shall decide after deposition which witnesses shall testify, pursuant to the impeachment rules. Excuse me?
That is weird, to say the least. Go on.
I'm okay with the deposition, but even if I get videotape it, and you're saying, well, we'll decide if they have to come and appear live as opposed to in lieu of presenting videotape deposition at trial.
I see.
You can do it that way. But it seems to me that they're taking the position you can take the deposition. I have the video. By the way, if I'm the House Dems and I get that, guess what I'm doing? I'm giving the damn deposition to every videotape deposition to every news organization.
Yes.
If you don't want to see it in the Senate, that's your problem. But the country's going to see it because I'm giving it to everybody. You don't have control of this deposition. Though they may say they do. They say, this is ours. We possess it.
This is part of the Senate record. I guess they could try anything. It is a weird thing. So, I guess so they've built additional protection into themselves. All right, if you somehow manage to force us to have witnesses, first we want a preview of what these witnesses are going to say and an opportunity to prevent them from saying it live inside the Senate chamber.
Right.
And so that's a pretty extraordinary thing all by itself. We'll have witnesses, but wait a second. I reserve the right to change my mind about that if they're damaging.
He's not going to change his mind about it. He is going to twist every arm to block any witnesses. There's just no doubt about it. They even have a contingency plan if somehow they get the votes to have Bolton testify. Though, again, I wouldn't limit it to Bolton. If I get Bolton, why can't I get Mulvaney? Why can't I get – well, I guess he's willing. But why can't I get other witnesses? This is insane. But, okay, well, now I'm going to call Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
Call Hunter Biden. Do it. I still don't get it. What am I afraid of Hunter Biden? What's Hunter Biden going to say? I'm a ne'er-do-well. I got this job off my dad's name. Okay, big deal.
He won't say it, obviously. But, yeah, I assume that they think – I guess they have in their heads. Trump certainly has in his head a Perry Mason moment. And isn't it true, Mr. Biden, that you plotted with our enemies to undermine the United States of America and sell us out as soon as but isn't it in fact the case that no means yes? I don't know that he'll say something and they'll do
I get all that, and they get to say, "Aha, Hunter Biden," but it's
of course you wouldn't say that. Because you're guilty, I don't know. They imagine this courtroom drama moment where, at the very least, even if he doesn't admit to something, that everyone comes around to what is essentially the QAnon position that this is true, that I have screamed my question, and so therefore, of course, Hunter Biden is going to deny it, but I'm totally right. Didn't you hear how loud I was? And I assume that a large part of the country says, oh, my God, they're crazy. And some other part of the country says, well, I'm more pro-Trump than ever. And the point, though, is that the Senate still says, I told Mitch I was going to vote not guilty, so let's do it already. This is even more embarrassing than I thought it was going to be because I thought there was going to be no witnesses. Now we look like idiots, but I have to do it, so let's do it. And that'll be it. So that's sad.
Right. Well, anyway, the contingency plan on Bolton, of course, is to put it in a classified setting.
Yes.
Because, executive privilege and whatever else all that means. But, executive privilege would apply even in the deposition. That doesn't even work. If your concern is executive privilege, then nobody should be able to hear it. Not the people taking the deposition either.
Yes. Well, I assume that there's, the fallback position is, well, okay, so the deposition is going to go forward. Our objections about executive privilege don't apply. But certainly he'll be discussing matters of national security. We need to do it in closed session, turn off the cameras, no public record of what he has to say. And then say, well, he pretty much changed his story and acquitted the president. I was surprised by that, said Senator Mitch McConnell. But that's the way it is. No, says every other senator. He said the opposite. Well, you say this and I say that. There's no record, so.
I haven't been on it in a long time, so I never have enough time. But so there's 7 minutes. So what? I'll give you just my 30,000-foot view for
Certainly. Go
for
ahead.
3 minutes. What would Democrats be trying to accomplish with all of this that they've done? The witness issues, the delay.
Illustrate the cover.
It's to delegitimate.
Yes, go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's to delegitimize, in my view, it's to delegitimize the acquittal.
Yeah.
To keep Trump is looking for exoneration and to make sure he doesn't get it, that everybody knows that this was a cover-up by the Republican senators. And, of course, the immediate political effect should be on people like first and foremost, Susan Collins, who's up for re-election in November, and we want to beat her. McSally, who is behind in Arizona. Gardner, who's probably a dead duck anyway, but nonetheless, let's bury him good. And hopefully put some hits on people like Tillis, who might be in a competitive race. So it is political, no question about it. On the merits, he should be removed. But the Republicans are playing politics. So guess what? We are going to extract a political price and deny that which Donald Trump craves, which is an exoneration. Of course, he will go on Twitter and say, I'm exonerated, look at me, blah, blah, blah. Right?
Yeah, he did it to the
So what?
Mueller report. Yeah.
But if you can look, 70% of Americans are expecting witnesses, and they're going to say, well, how come no witnesses?
Yeah.
Geez, that was weird. That's not what I see on TV, like on Law and Order and stuff.
Right.
So that, to me, is the purpose. That was the purpose of the delay, to build up this momentum for these questions. If she had just sent that, it would not be in the posture it's in now. I think Nancy Pelosi did well. I would have waited longer, even, to be honest with you.
Me too.
And I wouldn't have. I think you made a point yesterday. I would not have invited him for the State of the Union until this was over.
Yeah. I would have used this as an excuse. My initial excuse was no State of the Union until we get an apology to Debbie Dingell.
We don't know who's going to be the president then.
Yeah,
so
right.
we shouldn't invite you.
Right. If we didn't think that there was a legitimate reason to impeach and remove the president, we wouldn't have sent the articles over. So I'm not inviting him. I'll invite Pence if we're right.
Right. Exactly. So I those are minor things. I think it took a lot. Unfortunately, Democrats are so afraid of playing political hardballs. I give Pelosi credit for even doing what she did.
Yes.
It's so out of character for Democrats generally.
I'll agree.
So I think she showed some gumption that isn't always present. It's good to see that even the Chris Coonses of the Senate are calling it a cover-up.
Yes.
That Joe Manchin wants witnesses, that Doug Jones wants witnesses. There is a united front here, and that's the mantra. There's no dims and disarray on this one.
Yeah.
And there probably aren't any Republicans in disarray, as much as Susan Collins will want you to think she is, because even if she votes for witnesses afterwards and it's 52-48, she didn't make a stink. And she voted for these ridiculous rules that aren't the Clinton rules. So we need to hang her by her neck on it. And look, at the end of the day, when you're running in November, you can say, listen, if Trump's president, you really want these guys?
Yeah.
He'll run. He'll do whatever he wants.
Work.
You're electing a dictator if you vote for Trump and Republicans.
Yeah,
Maybe that'll have some impact
the first time. True. I hope so. It certainly should for the case of Susan Collins. I'll just sneak one more thing in for us to think about since we won't have time to actually discuss it. But a note for the record, a tweet bringing to my attention that the White House brief has a 37-page OLC memo dated yesterday in its appendix.
Yeah.
It includes that their conclusion that subpoenas issued prior to October 31st, 2019, when they had the formal impeachment vote, are invalid because there was not a formal impeachment inquiry vote. Of course, courts have gone the other way for the most part on that one, but the OLC considers itself sort of a sovereign division, and this is the sort of thing that would chip away at that. at some point in the future, but pretty amazing that they would go ahead and include that. And dated yesterday and introduced just now, and supposed to be controlling for the purposes of this trial. Amazing. Unfortunately, no time to discuss that. Thank you for coming on. We braved whatever it is that we might have braved. I don't
think anybody cares anymore, but I just didn't want to cause you trouble. So
but
anyway,
I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
If I
needed
can do it
myself.
again, let me know.
Okay, will do. And we'll perhaps talk to you again soon. In the meantime, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for his program. And I had forgotten our brand new schedule in which we were going to have Joan on Tuesdays, because it works out just fine because she's damn busy too. Perhaps we'll hear from her tomorrow. Thanks again, Armando. Take care. Take care of yourself, people.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, what if you didn't care that much about how crazy Republicans were over this impeachment nonsense and you wanted some real news? Well, I have good news for you. You can stay tuned right here on Netroots Radio for Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up here next for all the news that we didn't touch because we're too obsessed. He's on the case.